Thank you for joining us. We'll take just a minute to let people sign in, and then we'll get started. Hello, everyone. We're very glad so many of you have joined us to get an expert take on the critical aspect of cybersecurity for business aircraft. If you think you can take a break from your cybersecurity concerns once your jet takes off, think again. Today, we're going to discuss why and how you need to protect avionics systems and also airborne communications and entertainment systems in the cabin of your business aircraft. And to help us with this, I'm joined by Rob Hill, Regional Sales Director with CCX Technologies. CCX has developed technology to constantly monitor systems for possible security breaches and prevent them from happening. Also with us today is Rich Pilock, who is Vice President Product Line Management for Digital Solutions with SmartSky Networks. The company says that its new air-to-ground Wi-Fi network offers unprecedented speed and capacity for in-flight connectivity, while also delivering the high levels of cybersecurity that everyone needs. We'd also like to extend a warm thanks to the sponsors of today's webinar, CCX Technologies and SmartSky Networks. Now, I know you'll have plenty of questions for Rob and Rich, and we're going to get to those. Just type the questions in the webinar question section of your webinar panel, and we'll address them towards the end of this webinar. But first of all, I've got a poll question for all the participants. Let's get a sense for how we all feel about the cybersecurity threat. So all we were asking is, have you ever encountered a cybersecurity threat to your aircraft systems? Just a yes or no poll question. And so far, surprising number of yes answers. The no's are the majority so far, but we're still getting good 25% have experienced some kind of cybersecurity threat. That's very interesting. And we'll post the results there. Exactly 25-75. So this is definitely an issue, and I suspect that those who haven't experienced it need to make sure they do something to prevent that. So let's start with Rob. Thanks for joining us, Rob. And how much of an issue is cybersecurity for business aircraft operators? And do you have any idea how commonly the security of avionics for cabin systems might be getting compromised?
Well, first off, Matt, thanks for having us and hosting this for us. It's a pleasure to be here. We kind of have to look at a bunch of numbers right now. In truth, the situation isn't being monitored. People aren't monitoring cabin. They're not monitoring avionics at the moment. But what we do know is on the ground, 4.1 billion records, and I think we have a slide for that, have been breached, have been released out into the market. And that was in the first half of 2019. So there's no, the situation is only getting worse. I mean, we're all working from home. We're all connecting on our iPads to conference calls, to legacy systems, to customer resource systems. We're connecting more and more and more. We're using more and more applications. That makes it more, there's more opportunities for cybersecurity issues. And the aircraft is becoming an extension of the office now. You get on the aircraft. I've had clients get off out of their cars on their phone onto the aircraft, fire up their laptop and start their conference calls before they take off. All of that adds to how much connectivity we have and how at risk we are with cybersecurity. So then if you look at all of that and we say, hey, wait a minute, we have all of this contact on an aircraft that could cause us a problem. It costs us about $4 million. I think we have a slide for that too, to
Um,
get the breach under control. Yeah.
wow.
So yeah,
Sorry,
it's,
is that 3.92 million or billion? Or
bro,
it's
let's say
million per
3.92 million
per breach?
per breach.
Okay, okay.
So yeah, I misspoke. I like bigger numbers. It sounds great. I get, but the issue is it's 3.92 million, and that is if there's a breach. And the average day to find that breach on the next slide is about 300 days, like 279 days, according to IBM. So you don't even know that that breach is there, and all of a sudden you're trying to find it. And because cabins and cabin Wi-Fi and avionics aren't being monitored, there's no real answer to how big of a risk it is or what the actual numbers are. We know it's a huge risk, but we don't know what the numbers are because we haven't seen it. Nobody's monitoring it.
Thanks, Rob. So is it fair to say that some aircraft operators are somewhat oblivious to this problem and not fully comprehending the ways that they could be exposed during their normal operations?
I wouldn't say anybody's oblivious to it. I mean, if you work in an office, you work in a corporate environment, you know that there's cybersecurity issues there. It's not a new situation. It's known to most people. Some of the issues we see is they say, you know what, why would they want my stuff? It's not worth addressing. They feel it's not worth addressing. Sometimes they feel that they don't have a budget for it. They don't know how to ask for the money. It's not like putting a part on an aircraft where you say, I need that wheel to land. It's a little harder to quantify this and say that you need it. Some people kick it down the road. Some people just say, you know what, this is too hard to get my head. I can't wrap my head around it. I don't know how to deal with it. And so I think we face all of those things, but I don't think they're oblivious to it. But as we spoke of previously, I don't think they realize how big it is and how big and costly that risk is.
So let's dive down a little deeper. What are some of the main ways that systems can be compromised? And can you talk us through some of the ways our cybersecurity specifically can be breached, both in the cabin, but also flight crew use airborne connectivity as well. So the flight deck could be affected too, right?
Absolutely. I mean, I always go to I've done a lot of presentations on this, and I've always go to people. We are a big risk. We're humans. We make mistakes. People can trick us, fool us. We make mistakes. About 24% of breaches right now are caused by a human making a mistake. I've made the mistake. I've been talking to people, texting on my phone, and an email comes in for Netflix, and all of a sudden I'm clicking on a link, and it's not the right link. So we can be tricked. The other thing is that we also bring multiple devices. You know, when I get on an aircraft and I'm flying with clients or even commercially, I have my laptop, I have my iPad, I have my Kindle, I have my watch, and I have a work phone, and I have a personal phone. They all connect to the internet, and that makes it even harder to stop those connections and say, hey, there's more connections that you can have for that. If you're checking email while you're on your aircraft, which we all do, we're all flying and we're checking email, and somebody spoofs you like they did for me with Netflix, I click on a link. Even if you have a VPN, it's going to encrypt that malware and that virus. It's going to pull it cleanly through the VPN and put it up on your aircraft. And once it's on your aircraft, since nobody's monitoring the aircraft Wi-Fi up on the aircraft now, it could spread to everybody there. It could spread on that network right there. Same with the cabin, same with the avionics. I mean, right now, if they're using electronic flight bag and they don't connect to the proper Wi-Fi, secure Wi-Fi, they could transfer that data out in the open, and somebody could pick up where that aircraft's going and who's on it.
Excellent.
And then with the avionics, you can actually spoof. You can do the spoofing for ADS-B that's transferred unencrypted, GPS and transponders. I mean, nobody's monitoring the avionics right now. Nobody.
That is definitely a problem. So we heard a story the other day about how an Oxford University researcher managed to hack an electronic flight bag and cockpit communication systems of a Chinese airliner. Now, Rich, let's turn to you to get your perspective of SmartSky as a Wi-Fi network provider. And do you feel that some aircraft owners and operators are taking cybersecurity for granted when it comes to airborne connectivity? And shouldn't aircraft owners be able to take cybersecurity for granted with these systems? Kind of like automatic brakes on a car. So what sort of questions should they not only be asking themselves, but also their service providers?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think, well, I'll take a step back to that poll question. I think it was a 25-75 split. I would argue that's probably, those are the folks that know they've had an issue. That's probably at least 50-50, if not higher, of actual issues. The good bad guys don't let you know they were there. So those are the ones that you really worry about. So I think all operators, I think all owners are very concerned with security. And I think they're taking a lot of necessary steps to secure those passengers and to secure those assets. It would be nice if you could take them for granted, but you have to take that trust but verify approach to security. You have to trust that everybody is doing the right things, but then you need to use tools like CCX and others to verify that those things are correct. There's so many chances for misconfigurations in any system, especially in aircraft. Like Rob said, the EFP connected to the wrong Wi-Fi, and I think that was part of the case of that Chinese airliner. It was on the wrong Wi-Fi system. But that's the human factor, and it's so easy to make a mistake and bring something into the equation that is just unexpected and unaccounted for. Having visibility helps you to see that. So if that Chinese airliner had some sort of tool and saw this device on a network it shouldn't have been on, they could have stopped it very quickly. They would have seen traffic on a network that shouldn't have been there, or a type of traffic. So without a baseline of what normal is, you don't know what's not normal. So I think they're doing what they can, but these bad actors are very persistent, and they're very good at what they do. And I think there's probably just as much, if not more, effort on the bad side as the good side to do this, to take these actions. So I think really the key is, if the operator doesn't have an internal security team, they should go find an external one to help them with this. It's kind of like having a lawyer. You could probably figure it all out if you wanted to spend the time, but it's better to have an expert on your side that can help you through this. Figure out where these gaps are, put a prioritized plan in place, address those gaps, and work through them. So this cybersecurity landscape, it changes constantly. What it is today is different tomorrow. The whole definition of a zero-day vulnerability. You don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. And I think the folks who fly and operate these aircraft, they really shouldn't be worrying about this. They should have people that worry about this for them, and they should be able to trust those. So that trust should be there, but I don't think you'd put the trust in those systems necessarily as much as you put the trust in your team, whether that's an internal or extended team, to identify those gaps and keep them clean.
So Rich, further to that, what does good security look like when it comes to airborne connectivity?
Well, it's similar to locking your front door, right? If everybody in the neighborhood locks their front door and somebody walks down the street trying to find an open door, they're probably going to go in the easiest target and go in that front door. And I think any network, any cabin is the same way. Those same rules apply anywhere else on any network, right? Use encryption wherever you can. Encrypt, over encryption, and double encrypt and triple encrypt. Never use simple passwords. Always make sure you have at least some password. Make those steps harder and harder for the good guys to keep the bad guys out. Similar to that poll that we saw earlier, there are going to be some operators that are doing everything possible. And if a bad guy is targeting them or just stumbles upon them or whatever the case is, and it's difficult enough that it's not worth their time, they'll move on to the next one and the next one and the next one, if it's targeted or if it's random. But doing all those things to maintain they call the CIA, the confidentiality, the integrity, and the availability of your data. There's a lot of simple things that can be done to protect that. And Rob mentioned mobile devices. They're probably one of the biggest attack points because they're so hard to control. you have a flight and you've got passengers on it, do you check their devices to make sure they're free of malware? Of course not. You let them on the plane and they use the Wi-Fi, and who knows what they've introduced into your system that you just spent like millions of dollars securing an asset. You've now opened the door to who knows what. And there are plenty of stories of this, and you can go talk to all kinds of people who had this happen. And I tell you, another simple one is security patches. There's been so many really terrible stories of really bad incidents that would have been prevented if someone had just applied a patch to a device or an application or a software. And doing those things on a regular basis and keeping them patched like that, it can stop so many devices. There's a great bunch of Google searches you can do for those vulnerabilities that have been out for years, and people still have systems that are unpatched for them. So those are just some of the basics you should definitely cover.
So back to you, Rob. How is CCX addressing this risk? Can you explain how the CCX technology works and how it detects threats and how you then deal with them? Are we talking about setting up a firewall to block systems from getting corrupted? Is there some hardware and software involved?
Absolutely. A firewall is certainly a part of what we're doing. We have created an inline cybersecurity device that can go into an aircraft, that can sit on the aircraft's system, that allows us to monitor the network, third-party systems, allows us to monitor the avionics so that we can see what's going on that network. An example I use is that if you had a printer on board your aircraft and you had a line guy come on or line person come on and put ice in your system, ice on the jet, and they take a little SD card and put it in your printer, our system is going to catch that. Our system is going to say there's something else on your network. Do you know about it? And it's going to give alerts. So it is a firewall, but it's much more than that. It's also an intrusion prevention system, which means that it doesn't just notify you that there's something there, it blocks it and it stops it. So we can see the network. We can see that, I had a client that had one of their sons on board, and he was playing a video game to what Rich is talking about, didn't update his computer, brought up a virus. We'll be able to see that, but we'll also be able to see that if it's in the avionics, we can read the 429 bus. We'll know that, wait a minute, we have this system. We know that something isn't right as it's coming out. So it's much more than a firewall could ever be. And we can make sure that we're paying attention to what's happening on board that aircraft. And the client can see that. And when you combine the intrusion prevention system with an IDS, which is an intrusion detection system, everything's being acted on. It's being found and it's being acted on. We have the ability with that system using SmartSky's air to ground, using a Wi-Fi if they don't have live connectivity or any live connectivity, LTE or SATCOM, to be able to update for zero-day exploits, like Rich said. I mean, the safest day we had, I think Rich will agree, the safest day we had in cybersecurity was yesterday. We don't know what we're facing today, but this system, the AP250, will detect and block all of those.
So it's kind of like the cybersecurity helper that helps keep you protected if you're not if you don't have all the capability in house, for example.
Exactly. If what's happening is you have this office in the sky right now. So you're in your office. If you had an office on the ground, you would have a firewall system. You'd have an intrusion prevention system in your office. You would have all that. People think that because they're flying in the air and they're moving very, very fast, that they don't have that need. They really, really do. That's what it does, is it makes sure. And then it's protecting the avionics, because right now nobody's watching the avionics. You talk to people and they say it's secure. It is, but nothing is impossible to break into nowadays. Nothing.
And this brings up another point, and that is, I assume that it's really important to work with the corporate IT department on making sure that they're in the loop on securing the flying side of the operation, not just ignoring their resources, right?
It is surprising how many cybersecurity departments that the businesses that have a cybersecurity department, the aviation department hasn't brought cybersecurity in, and so cybersecurity hasn't asked to see the aircraft. Now there's an issue there too, because they don't understand aviation. There's a whole different set of rules. Pen testing an aircraft, penetration testing on an aircraft is probably not something you want to talk about and do without knowing what it's going to do to your aircraft.
Exactly. Rich, are you finding that you're having these conversations with your customers?
Yeah, it comes up quite a bit when we talk about the security side, but what you mentioned about the IT or security groups, there's a big disconnect between a lot of these groups. It seems like there's some percentage that seem to have it pretty well under control. There's another percentage who are scared to death of messing with that aircraft and who's sitting in that aircraft and don't want to put any controls in place. And then even in those cases, a lot of the principals or executives aren't really subject to the same controls as most of the passengers, so they can't do it. We had a story years ago, I don't even know when it was, but we talked to an aircraft operator, and they were trying to put some security measures in place, and they were working through the security team. And security team's response is, we don't need any of this. All of our devices, VPN back in the home, so we're secure. We don't need any of it. And I think the director said, well, you do know that all the passengers turn off the VPN as soon as they get on the plane because it slows them down. And the look on his face was pure astonishment. And the next question was, so what can we do to fix this? But that's the disconnect. I think they think, like Rob said, in a corporate environment, there's tons of tools that you can spend tens of millions of dollars very easily putting systems in place on the ground, IDS, IPS, firewalls, layer 7 firewalls, everything. But when it comes to the aircraft, it's hardware, right? You have to get an STC, it's expensive. The big companies like the Ciscos of the world, it's not worth the return on investment to adapt these devices to put them in the air. So there's just not a lot of equipment for this. So I think it's a big disconnect there, and it's really is a challenge. And luckily, it's been part of the problem, I think, part of the solution, I think, is that the connectivity to the aircraft is relatively slow. So it's a bit of a pain in the neck for these attackers to work with 600-800 milliseconds of latency or slow bandwidth connections. Their tools aren't made for that. They're made for terrestrial systems. So unless it's a very targeted attack, I think a lot of them just kind of have a hard time getting to it. But Rob said, everything's exposed. You may think you're in the air and you're flying around, but you're just an IP address on the ground. There's no difference there. If somebody can see that IP, which if you can see the internet, they can see you. And I know all the providers and all of the connectivity companies do a really good job of doing everything they possibly can to keep this stuff safe and secure. But like we said earlier, there's a lot of effort the other direction as well too. So it's not a knock on them at all. They're doing a great job. But it's a constant battle.
Yep. So that brings us to a good point for our next poll question. And let's get the poll going. We're going to ask, do you feel comfortable that your aircraft systems are not exposed to a threat? And let's see what this looks like. Interesting, looking like the majority do not feel that their systems are not exposed. So in other words, they're worried that their aircraft might be exposed to a threat. Looks like the percentages are working out just about same as last time. About a quarter yes and 3/4 no. Very interesting results. And you can see the results for yourself.
That was close to the first one.
Very interesting. So
there's an old saying, if it's powered on, it's exposed.
Right.
Exactly.
Right.
That's really what people should think, isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay. So Rob, let's go back to you for a minute. And it seems surprising that these issues haven't been addressed by avionics and cabin system manufacturers. And what led to CCX developing the AP250 and this whole concept of adding something on that is going to give cybersecurity protection in the aircraft?
Well, the good news is it is starting to be addressed. I mean, people are talking about it now. People are on this seminar right now, and that is the good news. And we can't claim to be the first company that's looked at this and offering a cyber security solution. But we think that the solutions that are out there, the people that have skipped a couple of steps. When we think that they rushed to get a solution out, which was really important. But they missed a few steps. I mean, one of the things is you can't just monitor on the ground. And right now, they're monitoring on the ground. People are monitoring on the ground, but that, like we said, if you have a VPN, your data is protected. But if you get a bad email and you click on that link, you're going to pull it up. And network providers, do a great job of trying to secure their whole network. But if I, as a human, click on something and offer it to come to my computer, nobody can stop that until it is opened up and seen. And so it's, it now has to happen on the aircraft. There needs to be perpetual monitoring on board that aircraft all the time, because everybody's connected all the time to the internet. They need to make sure that it's being connected. There needs to be, and with avionics, right now, nobody is monitoring avionics, and that needs to be monitored all the time. It needs to be an industry expectation that we monitor the networks and the avionics all the time. If you buy a federal fire system and put it in a federal facility, each valve that's connected has to have security, has to have cybersecurity certifications, and has to be monitored. We need to do that for aircraft too. It just needs to be an expectation that it's there. Updates need, as Rich said, if updates need to be done, you got to make sure that the updates are done on the aircraft. You have to have a way to know that has been done. You need to make sure your data is encrypted. The solution that has to occur is encrypt the data. And we know it's not out there in the market right now because the founders of our company developed the routers that are in the market right now. They developed the equipment in the market right now. That's their founders, and they felt it wasn't enough. And they've now started this company to provide that solution. And that's what we're trying to do.
So Rob, once you've got the system installed, how are the pilots and the mechanics and the flight department kept in the loop on what's going on cybersecurity wise?
I always joke and say the answer is yes. Tell us how you would like to be kept in the loop. It's an issue. What we do is we really sit down and say, okay, we can send alerts out, and we do send alerts out. Question is, we need to sit down with each flight department and say, how do you want those alerts? If you're a small flight department, if you're a family flight department, usually all those alerts go right to the aviation department. But as we spoke of earlier, if you have a cybersecurity department, and let's say that we notice something, or the equipment notice something in the cabin, we can notify the aviation department, which I recommend all the time, but we also can send an alert across to the cybersecurity, because if it's a laptop, let the IT department deal with the laptop. Let the aviation department know there's a problem. But if it's avionics, you don't want your cybersecurity involved. They don't understand aircraft whatsoever. All of that goes right to the aviation department. We can send it wherever you want, but that's really what we do. We also have a dashboard. We have a dashboard that you can pull up. You can see what's going on. You can see what the actions are for both the avionics and for the cabin. Pilots and maintenance are skilled in what they do. They shouldn't have to worry about cybersecurity. We have the ability to be that cybersecurity department if they'd like to. We offer that service, and we're more than happy to do it, but we're flexible. If you've got one you already work with, we can help that too. And we can be the in-between people. Sometimes we can even be the bad guy if need be, and tell them what they can do and what they can't do to keep cybersecurity from a corporate level from messing up a flight department.
Okay, so then how about the customers themselves? What role do they play in making sure that the CCX system is doing what it says it's doing to keep their systems secure?
That's a great question because it's kind of three steps. I always say you got to understand the risk. You got to understand that this is a painful. You got to look at this. You got to spend money on it. It's not like you get a physical something back to justify it. You have to understand the risk, and then you have to monitor. And I tell everybody, not just monitor, but monitor, 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 monitor. You don't know what's happening unless you monitor. On terrestrial networks in offices, those networks are being monitored all the time. So if we're not monitoring the avionics and we're not monitoring the cabin Wi-Fi in the aircraft, we don't know what's happening, and we need to know that. And then lastly, the third thing I've always said is it's training. Rich has heard me say this, and Rich has said this himself. We have to train people. I know it's a pain in the butt, but every 90 days or so, it doesn't have to be a lot. You need to tell your staff what's happening. You need to tell your staff what the new things are, what's going on, and do some cybersecurity training because it changes day to day, much less every 90 days. But at least keep people on the same page. Makes a big deal.
Matt, can I
And
add to
then,
that?
yeah, of course, Rich, please.
Yep. So Rob mentioned the monitoring, and something to keep in mind with the monitoring. It's I know we're talking about the aircraft itself, but this is part of a larger system. Those laptops, those devices, they're all part of a larger system that likely has tremendous monitoring on it. And there could be events that in and of themselves appear to be trivial. However, when they're taken into context of the overall system, they may be contributory to an actual big issue. When you look back at in a forensic analysis of some sort of cyber incident, there's always these little events that went unnoticed, but they were actually part of it. So capturing and monitoring all that is key to looking at the big picture to try to figure out what happened, how it happened, how to stop it from happening in the future. So just wanted to add to that monitoring is critical, not just to the aircraft, but to the entire cyber system.
Thank you, Rich. So, Rob, let's look at once the technology is installed, what kind of support does CCX provide to the operator?
Well, what we will provide then is we're going to help you set up your monitoring, set up what you need, because this client or customer may need something that this client doesn't need, and it takes a little bit of time. Again, just like setting up a network inside an office, you have to set that network up, find out what the rules are that they'd like applied, find out how they use their network, what they like to do, make sure that traffic can pass. I mean, it was so kind of rich to talk about the monitoring. You got to know what's going through that network to let that through. But we can help you set up that monitoring. We can do as much or as little as you'd like. We set up the notifications. We set up the rule updates. What will you let through? What you won't let through. And we can walk away from it, and your cyber team can manage part of that, or your aviation department can manage part of it, or we can do more of that. We have to work all the time with this, with customers and clients and providers like SmartSky, because we have to work together to make sure that we understand what the data is being passed. We have to make sure that we're protecting every client along the whole way. And so it takes a little bit of time. Once it's set up, once the rules are set up, once it's working, then you can walk away a little bit, but you still need to monitor it. You need to have somebody looking at it, somebody paying attention to it, and somebody reading those results. And we can do that for clients, or they can do it themselves if they have the team.
Thank you, Rob. So, Rich, let's look at it from the network side. How does SmartSky ensure the network is secure? Is SmartSky's approach different than other network providers?
Yeah, I don't know if it's any different. I think everybody starts trying to build a secure network, and that's always the goal. I can say, the SmartSky ATG network is built on the 3GPP, the 4G LTE standard, and actually borrows quite a bit from the 5G standard as well. And the 4G architecture was developed fairly recently, and being that it was developed in recent times, its cybersecurity was built in from the very beginning. So when you start looking at a lot of the protocols and a lot of the standards, a lot of those really were built right from the start to say, how do we help keep users and devices secure? So, and everybody's familiar, or most people are familiar with LTE for your devices, your personal device, your cell phone, and things like that. So in our case, the modems essentially are our devices. And for LTE and for our network, each of these modems, we use authentication and cryptology keys in order to allow those devices to gain access to the network. So this prevents any device from just jumping on the network, what they call a rogue device or a rogue antenna or anything like that. So we end up with a virtual channel that's secured and encrypted from the device, which is in the aircraft, to the ground. And you talked earlier about the Chinese airline story. I think that was that satellite eavesdropping story. And I've always heard stories about how you could set up a satellite dish on the ground and pick up things. And I'm assuming it's possible, but I've never tried it. I'm not going down that path. But Rob may have tried it. I don't know. But in theory, there's a broadcast component to that where that signal is just sent back down and it's trying to find the plane within its broadcast signal. And I'm sure there's a lot of technology around that, and not trying to simplify it. But in this case of ours, it creates a virtual channel for the LTE device to make that connection. And that goes for everything. So for all those devices, there's a lot of different components to our network, from the air interface to the radio network to the backhaul to the core network. And that LTE standard bakes in security requirements all throughout. And then, of course, on top of that, we have third-party third-party auditors that will validate that for us from time to time as well, too, to give our customers assurances that not only those standards in place, that we're actually following those standards, and that we can warrant that we're doing those things the best way we can. But a big piece of that really is the encryption. I mention encryption all the time. That's going to save you. That's a big backup policy for most things you can do. So encrypting that data at each one of those links, if for some reason somehow somebody did intercept that data and it is encrypted, it's going to be very difficult to decipher that. Not impossible, but difficult. It's not clear text just floating over the air.
So Rich, does that mean like the SmartSky approach means that each aircraft's connectivity is kind of ring fenced and protected somehow?
Yeah, sort of. So essentially, when you have the planes flying through the sky, that authentication and encryption method, it creates essentially a secure virtual channel with the ground network. And then we also use what's known as beamforming, which actually even focuses that beam more so from the antennas, reducing that signal spread, and again, reducing the chances of that signal being broadcast beyond the aircraft and somehow being intercepted. But again, if it is intercepted, it is encrypted very strongly, and it's very difficult to decrypt or decipher what that data is. So yeah, so it's essentially a virtual cable in the sky from the aircraft to the tower.
Okay, so Rob, how does CCX's technology complement a network like SmartSky's if it's already encrypted and everything?
So the data is encrypted, which means if they grab that data en route, they can't see it. But if you go to a site that has virus or malware on it, and you pick a site that you may go to, a news site that's been compromised, it's going to encrypt that malware and that data, and it's going to go through that pipe because it's just encrypted and get up to that aircraft and then open up and expand in that aircraft. If you have our system on there monitoring it, when it opens up, that intrusion prevention system is going to block that because it's a known malware, it's a known bad thing. So it's kind of, as a provider of bandwidth, you have to make sure your network's secured, your network's tested, your network's monitored. As Rich said, you got to see all the little bits of data to see if there's a bigger picture. But if you make a choice to pull something up, it's going to pass through, whether it's encrypted or not. It's going to pass through and then open up. And that's where we step in, and we're another step in saying, okay, your office is secure. You've opened up, you brought up a virus or malware, and now it's spreading, and we're going to stop it. We're going to stop it from spreading once it's up there.
Great, thank you. So we're going to get to some questions fairly soon here, but Rich, can you talk about the SmartSky Skytelligence platform and how that enables combining optimum connectivity with cybersecurity?
Yeah, so this kind of comes back into the whole monitoring and situational awareness. So one of the goals with the web platform, the Sky Intelligence web platform, is really to ensure that the right person has access to the right information, at the right time. In that cyber world, you really need access to real-time information, and you have to trust that information, and it has to be accurate. Simple things like a timestamp or ADS-B reports. There's plenty of sources for ADS-B reports, right? Anybody can go get those. You can put up your own antenna and grab them. But if someone's spoofing that information and the location of that aircraft isn't what you think it is, and you're trying to use that information to maintain your security posture and understand what's going on, that changes the story dramatically. Timestamps, same thing. If you're trying to correlate what, like I said earlier, seemingly dissimilar information, they all need to be on the same timestamp. So one of the simple things we do, which sounds simple enough, is we make sure that all the data feeds that we have are normalized to the same timestamp in the same time zone at all times. So when you're looking at events and correlating them, you have some trust in the fact that those things are actually synced up and correct, and you can count on those. So that's one of the big things we do. And we're also looking constantly to build out the platform. We're trying to find any other data streams we can find that helps increase that situational awareness to improve decision making. So it could be even a matter of having multiple data sources for the same information, so customers can look for those discrepancies on their own and act accordingly. Flight tracking is a great one. You can see some anomalies every now and then, and it's just a system type situation where things just don't look the way they should. But if you only had one source of information for that and you're making decisions based on that, you could make the wrong decision. So having a bunch of different sources of information coming in gives you a better situation, a better response plan, and really just trusting that system that I'm looking at the right thing at the right time. So,
Excellent.
and as far as the innovation side goes, I think you mentioned that too, is we're trying to make these things very easy to consume and very cost effective. We're trying to be very transparent with the source of this data so that customers can choose the right data for that application that you're trying to build. Like I just mentioned, if you're using flight tracking information, you don't want 3 of the same sources of that flight tracking information if you're trying to get some sort of redundancy for security purposes. So we try to be very transparent to say this is where we're getting it, so that when they're doing that, they can say, okay, great, I've got a different diversity of this data set. So now I can really get a good view of the world and make some really good decisions on it.
Thank you very much, Rob and Rich. Now let's go to some questions from our audience. But first, I have one question of my own that I'd like to throw out, and that is, I'm going to assume that if you're sending an alert about a cybersecurity breach, you probably don't want it to go to the pilot while they're in the middle of landing or something important like that.
Right, and that's part of the rules you set up. You set those rules up, and the other thing you want to do is you want to make sure it's encrypted when it's sent to, because you don't want anybody else getting that information and being able to do anything with it. And then the other thing I do tell everybody is that you never want to call it a breach until somebody who makes more money than you calls it a breach, because that's a whole different set of rules and laws you have to follow.
Great. So, Rich, interesting. It's not really a question; it's kind of a statement. But see what you think about this. A member of the audience says that over 60% of active business aircraft with onboard internet and wireless cabin entertainment systems lacked basic router password protection and had little to no additional configurable basic router security, and then went on to say nearly 75% use internal or limited WAP technologies with little or no WEP, firewall and VPN solutions. Are you seeing that out in the wild?
I mean, the percentages, I'm sure it's close to that. Yeah, for sure. It's always disheartening to see blank passwords on anything, whether it's an airplane or even a home router. It's such a simple thing to fix. And I think that's why a device like CCX has brought to market. I've been looking for one of these for years. I think it's just fantastic, because that's how would you know you have an issue if you didn't see that, right? I mean, you're blind, that plane's flying, you're assuming everything is okay. And just because you haven't heard anything, everybody says, well, we must be okay. For anyone who's been through any kind of cyber event, you realize that like I said earlier, the really good bad guys, they don't let you know they're there. They're not there to destroy data. They're not there to make your life miserable. They're there to park themselves as long as they can, undetected. And if they think they've been detected, maybe then they'll do destructive stuff and run for the hills or do what they do. But the good ones, you don't know they're there. So that's why I say earlier, when people say it's only 25% of it, it's definitely higher than that. Whether it's 26% or 99%, it's more than 25%. Those are the folks that know something's happened. Devices like CCX and there's other products out there and there's other companies out there doing a good job. I would get them all. I'd put everything I could on my plane to make sure I could see as much as I could see, because the value of the information and the passengers, you think about who's sitting in these planes, that's valuable information. If I was a bad guy, that's who I'd go after. I'd want to know what they know. And I think that's very much a reality.
It's interesting because this person also goes on to say that there was some testing in relation to the DEF CON conference, and they found 18 out of 20 business aircraft were susceptible, but the 2 that weren't had the CCX device installed. But in regards to the, I'm not sure. I'll have to check. But
I didn't type. It wasn't me.
It wasn't you, Rob. Rob, in regards to the AP250, somebody wants to know, aren't you creating a common point of failure on the aircraft network by adding this unit? And what additional protections exist to prevent that from happening?
It's not an additional, it's not a single point of failure. I mean, you have a router on board your aircraft if you're doing this anyway, and if that router goes down, you're going to have a failure no matter what. So if you have our router on board, and there's always an issue that something might happen to it, but we're the pedigreed group of engineers that have built the previous 3 sets of routers out there. We're pretty good at what we go do, and you always have, it could have that problem, and it could cause an issue there, but so could anything on there. Your antenna could cause the issue, the router could cause the issue. There's a bunch of different things, but that could cause an issue that wouldn't have anything to do with our router. But if you don't have it on there, you don't know if somebody is in that network. And to Rich's point, there's billions of dollars of information on that single aircraft flying with a very large tail number. And if you give me 15 or 20 minutes, I'll put that tail number in and I'll find out whose aircraft it is, no matter how hard you try and obfuscate it. And I'll also find pictures of who's getting on and off that aircraft. And with that information, I can get what I need. And you won't know that unless you have active monitoring on board that aircraft to see exactly what's going on. And that's not even including the safety issue with the avionics. If you don't know that, everybody says your avionics, it's really hard to break into that. It is. I agree with that 1,000%, and flying is safe. But if you're not monitoring it, how do you know? How do you know?
So the question came up, how do you know if it's failed or stopped monitoring? And then also, how does the system get updated and how often?
So, I mean, if it's not monitoring, you'll actually you'll see the reports and you'll see that it's not feeding any data. So that's how you know it's not monitoring. If your aircraft is connected to the internet, and by any way, I mean, it can be LTE, it can be SATCOM, it could be radio frequencies, it doesn't matter. As long as it has that, we can push updates to it. Or if you choose to do that, you can push updates to it. So it can be updated at any time as long as it has an internet connection. If it's flying, we have some government aircraft that doesn't have internet connectivity. When they come back down to the ground, they actually update it once it's in a secure Wi-Fi.
So that's a good point. I mean, there are a lot of airport facilities have Wi-Fi networks, but that might not be the most secure way to do that kind of an update.
And we all do it through encryption. So if it comes from wherever you're doing that, you're encrypting that data and pushing it through. So they can't necessarily grab that data and see what's happening. They just know, they may know that there's a data stream if you grab the wrong network. And that's part of the key. I mean, the key is you have secure boots for your hardware, and you have encryption, as Rich said. If you encrypt it, you make it really hard for them to get the data. Almost impossible, but not quite. But you have to do the updates, because the updates, if there's a 0-day update that comes out today, somebody creates a whole new hole in a network, we're able to push it out if needed.
Thank you, Rob. So, Rich, question, would you recommend that companies have a security policy to look at all IT devices? In other words, everything that people bring on board, to protect the network? And
probably not, just because it's really not reasonable. And then you're going to put that in the hands of a maintenance guy or somebody else who's really not qualified to do that. I think having the tools in place to see things like a CCX tool to say, I'm flying and I've got 12 passengers and there's 30 devices. If one of those devices starts acting inappropriately, there should be the ability to shut that device down and protect the rest of the aircraft, right? And I know a lot of the devices and networks out there today do a great job of doing that. And I would rely on them, as well as devices like CCXs, to do that. I don't think it's reasonable to do that. I think you could try. I think there are probably some certain missions or high security missions where that might be warranted. But for the typical aircraft, I think it's just too much. Now, there are things you can do too by having multiple networks on board, a guest network versus a private network. If the traffic's being VPN back to the corporate network, obviously the last thing you want is an unprotected device somehow getting into the firewalled area. So there's a lot of things you can do on the configuration side that would help make that easier. But no, I don't think it's feasible. I just don't think it's feasible. You'd make it so hard to work.
And
exactly.
Matt, if I can, I mean, if you're taking a client trying to close a deal and you're traveling with them, it's really hard to say, give me your phone, give me your laptop, and let me do some scrutiny on it before we go, because we're trying to merge our companies. Not going to happen.
Right.
So the security has to be in the background and device agnostic, because you never know what new devices are coming out.
Right.
Right.
Well, look at it. You go to a business of any kind, right, and they have a free Wi-Fi. That's not their corporate Wi-Fi. That's a firewall protected, isolated network that if you got an issue, it's just running out to the internet and it's not going to commingle with the other devices on there. So they've done things to take it out of your hand. Same thing. It wouldn't be feasible if you go to a restaurant for them to check every device, right? So
exactly.
yeah, it's the same concept, right? You go to a hotel, that hotel network that you use, that's a guest network. It might have hundreds of devices on it and hundreds of access points, but if they've done it right, you can't bridge that into their reservation system and give yourself a free night. I'm sure some people can, but I certainly can't.
So Rob, how about certifications? Are there supplemental type certificates for installation of the AP250, or are you working on approved model lists?
We are working on that right now. We are in the process of testing. We're working on STCs at the moment. I always say if a client's interested, we'd be more than happy to talk to them and work within their parameters to help them make that happen. But we're very close. We are very, very close.
So another question for you, Rob. When you say monitor the avionics, what does that mean? And what's an example of an alert?
So if we're connected to the 429 bus and we're reading the data coming off there, and we see a signal, or the system sees a signal that shouldn't be there or isn't what it should be, we have the ability to alert. I'll use spoofing as an example. If your GPS is telling you you're in one place and we have the data coming from 429 that's saying, hey, we're getting conflicting data here, we're able to say, you need to check this. There's an alert. Something isn't reading right. And it may not be a failure of the electronics. It may be something might be injected into that signal that's causing it to believe it's somewhere else. Everything's reporting right, but this little piece over here isn't. We want to be able to notify you that way.
Interesting. So you think that could really help with ADSB spoofing? Because that's a big concern, because the ADSB out signals, as we all know, have zero encryption and are.
It has zero encryption. Yeah, I mean, anything that's not encrypted can be grabbed and spoofed and maybe injected to have, to affect where that aircraft really is or where everybody thinks it is. And we're working on a solution for that now to even make that, to try and get that signal more secure for our clients.
Another interesting question. We've been talking a lot about Wi-Fi, but most of these devices use Bluetooth also. Is that also able to be protected in this environment?
No, Bluetooth will be between my earphones and my phone, but the data that goes through it, if the data is going in and out of the network, will go through the inline cybersecurity appliance. And if there would happen to be a breach or a incident there, it would catch that as it went through. So the signal, the Bluetooth signal itself isn't something that we monitor. But if it's sending data, if your Bluetooth is sending data out and it needs to go down to the ground, we're going to catch it before it goes out of the aircraft.
Okay. And Rich, when you what is the most critical area of cybersecurity concern that people should worry about in an aircraft these days?
I mean, obviously the avionics, but I would say that's, under control for the most part. But talking about the cabin, I guess I would start with the devices. I'd start with the router because that's your control point for everything. So making sure it's patched, making sure it's got the necessary passwords on it. They're not simple passwords. Verifying the configuration, making sure that there's nothing plugged in that shouldn't be plugged in, that all the devices are set up correctly. Yeah, I think I would just start with that because that's kind of the heart of the network is the cabin router and the access point that goes with it.
Okay. And here's another question, little on the technical side, Rich, but it says, given that SSN is built around LTE security protocols, why not block malware on the ground from coming onto the aircraft?
Well, like Rob mentioned earlier, if it's encrypted, we can't see it either. So that's part of the challenge there. Yeah. Yeah. So it's.
And yeah, go ahead.
No, please.
Well, and if it comes up in an email and you click on a link, it's going to see it as an executable file that you've allowed to happen, and it'll let it pass right through.
Yeah, we can't. I mean, there's some obvious things any network provider can do on the ground, and that's can block known bad IP addresses. You can work with different agency and subscriptions to do things like that. Of course, we will do that just like everybody else does. But when it comes down to the individual packets, encryption's encryption. If a customer has a VPN from their device to wherever, just like the bad guy, we can't see it either. So it's just all traffic to us. It's just bits and bytes.
Thanks, Rich. And you could probably answer this one too. Why has the industry as a whole not pushed for stronger encryption? Especially, I mean, the industry has been using ACARs for decades, and that is not encrypted at all. But it just seems that it's only become of interest to look at cybersecurity just in fairly recent years.
Other than the fact that aviation technology seems to lag the terrestrial stuff for some reason, I think I've thought for a long time it's because a lot of the big players don't jump into that market because the return on investment isn't there. If you went to a Cisco, they have probably 100 devices they could sell you for different security applications and things like that. But none of them are going to run in an aircraft, right? You don't have the processing power. You may have the disk base these days, but the processing power alone, it's not there. So, and the development time, as you know, as everybody on this call knows, to get STCs for every different model, it's just not a business plan that makes sense to them. So it requires someone else coming up with something like CCX's devices that is cross-platform, that is virtual, that can do a lot of different things in a common box for a lot of different airframes. So unfortunately, it just comes down to a business model. There's just not enough of it to make enough money to go for the investment.
So speaking of investment, this will be our final question. Rob, we have a G650 operator asking about what it would cost to install the AP250 in their airplane. And I know you probably don't want to talk price specifics, but what kind of information can you give the audience?
Well, actually, if they'd like to reach out, I can give them a much better estimate, but it's more reasonable than it is to install some equipment, some of the routers that are out there today. But it's an aircraft. It's still going to be a little bit pricey, but it's not going to be more than adding modems and routers to your aircraft as you do right now. We tried to keep that price down and in line with that.
Presumably there's an ongoing service charge or fee per aircraft.
There's there'll be fees per aircraft. There's the equipment itself, and then there's fees per aircraft. It depends on how much of a subscription you want for some of the filtering that we do, some of the monitoring, whether you need us to be your cybersecurity or whether you just want us to pass that data. Some of that can be set up and it's a fire and forget. Some of it would be a subscription based. It really requires us sitting down and say, what are you looking for? And then we can give them that data. But because we are all familiar in this market, because we grew up in this market, we understand those pressure points and price points, and we've tried to make it as reasonable as we can so that people can have the security.
Great, thank you. So just to wrap up, Rich, would you like to summarize the message here that we're trying to tell people?
I'd say invest as much as you can possibly invest on the cybersecurity side of the aircraft. There's not enough you can do, honestly. I mean, really, there isn't. No matter what you do, there's still going to be gaps. Get a prioritized list, get some help. If you don't have help, find some qualified help to help you walk through this. It's helpful if they know the aviation space, but if not, at least if they know the cybersecurity space, they understand the threat and they can help understand where the gaps are. Analyze what you have today, look at the threat vectors and figure out ways to mitigate those. And like Rob said earlier, monitor. All that stuff is critical. The more you can capture, the better you can see what's going on and react to it and protect those assets.
Thank you, Rich. And Rob, any closing thoughts?
I would just like to say, I mean, Rich summed it up perfectly. Things that you can do that won't cost you any money, make sure you do that training, talk to your people about it. Make sure that you actually have a plan in case it does happen, that you know what you're going to do. And choose huge providers that understand that this is an issue and an ongoing issue. Somebody like SmartSky that literally understands cybersecurity that has to occur on their network in order to make things safe. Make sure you're asking those questions of your providers. You won't protect from everything, but you gotta do it. You gotta make sure that they have an answer for you, as I know SmartSky does.
Excellent. Rob, Rich, thank you so much for participating, and we'd also like to thank CCX and SmartSky for their kind sponsorship of today's webinar. This webinar is recorded and will be shared with everyone tomorrow, and if we didn't get to your questions, we'll follow up directly with a response to those questions as well. Thank you very much, and I've certainly learned a lot, and I hope you have too. Have a great day.
Thanks, Matt.
Thank you. Have a good day, everybody.